Well, good afternoon. It is a distinct pleasure to be here today with such an illustrious panel. I've personally spent a great deal of my career delivering transit, so this is also not only a pleasure for me, but very personal about the topic. So I want to dive right in and start by asking Carolyn to get us started here with the fact that the pandemic and remote work, we all know, have changed things a lot, right? And have affected transit agencies differently. Can you give us some thoughts about how you've adjusted transit service to accommodate the now?
Yeah, one of the things that VTA with Clara Valley Transportation Authority is that we had just implemented a Next network. We did a lot of work within within Santa Clara County, not San Mateo, but Santa Clara County, to find out, where we can make changes and really start to make services more available for what we thought were people who needed transit as an option: more midday service, more weekend service, more late night service. And so what made that January 2020, the pandemic hit in March 2020. So of course our ridership plummeted, but it started to come back relatively soon. So the thing is really focusing on what you would call your essential workers, but meanwhile also that ability to be able to, as you brought your services back on, to actually know what routes those were. And we were actually already had that network. But I think that's been a lot of learning experience. I was in Utah when the pandemic first hit, running the Utah Transit Authority, and I will say on there, we took some of the services that we had off of the commuter rail market, because that had gone down quite a bit, sorry, and Michelle, but it had gone down because it was a very heavily commute market. And we took those hours and put it on a route and put more hours on that route because we had more ridership on that route during the pandemic than pre-pandemic, which told us we were underserving the transit dependent on the people who really needed transit to go places. And I think that's true for a lot of us in the Bay Area. We just, maybe not San Francisco, we haven't been able to invest at the level per capita that we would really like to make us a really good transit system going forward. So the pandemic is really learning not just learning who the new market will be in the future, but responding to the market almost continuously as to what you need to put out on the street.
We had a very similar experience in San Francisco on Muni, where during the worst days of COVID, we knew we needed to make the system faster, more frequent, and more reliable in order to manage the social distancing rules. So we built 21 new miles of transit-only lanes. We abandoned all of our schedules and simply asked our operators to space themselves out evenly in order to improve reliability. And the result of that is we've held on to those changes even now, and we're seeing that driving all of our ridership. Even in the city with the slowest rate of return to office of arguably any place in the world, our high-frequency lines that do not go downtown are at between 120 to 120% of pre-COVID ridership weekdays, and already up to 153% of pre-COVID ridership weekends and midday. Which we had never expected would be possible. Investing in making transit fast, frequent, reliable, clean, safe is the key to ridership, and then also focusing on the new emerging ridership patterns, which are not focused on peak period commute service downtown, but neighborhood to neighborhood service and neighborhood to essential institution service.
I can provide a little bit of our experience. And as Carolyn pointed out, I mean, we have as a commuter railroad, we were very highly dependent on our fare box. And we had most of our riders, commuters, riding in the peak period. And that was the hallmark of our success. We were covering over 70% of our operating costs through the fare box, like unheard of. But so you can imagine once COVID hit, and for this prolonged period where work from home is more the rule than the exception, we've had to adapt, and we've adapted in some of the same ways that Jeff and Carolyn talk about. We are not as flexible in terms of being able to move vehicles to different routes. We have one route, and God willing, the vehicle stays on that route. But what we have done is we've really invested a lot in the weekend and the off-peak times, and that's where we've seen the growth too. That's the biggest learning that we've had.
Deputy Administrator Vanterpool, you've seen firsthand that this whole issue that we're discussing is not just a Bay Area issue. And we'd love to hear if you could share with us some other examples, other changes, things that you've seen nationally that contribute to thoughts on this.
So just some context on Federal Transit Administration. We are one of 9 agencies within the U.S. Department of Transportation. And we have 2 key roles. Number one is we take our taxpayer dollars and we invest them in subways and light rail cars and ferries and buses. Our second role is we provide safety oversight for all of the transit systems across the United States. So this is not a unique situation that we're experiencing in California. We have certainly seen the pandemic have a significant toll on transit systems across the United States. In fact, by 2024, the fiscal cliff or the funding shortfall due to decreased revenue and reduced ridership is going to be about $1.2 billion. In 2 years, that shortfall across the top 25 transit agencies, and those are those agencies with the highest ridership, we're going to see a $10.3 billion shortfall. That is significant because we know that our transit systems support our workforce, they support our economies, they mitigate climate change, and in fact, many of the goals at the Federal Transit Administration and priorities are very much the same priorities that SVLG has: climate mitigation, affordable housing, innovation, sustainable workforce, sustainable infrastructure, and workforce development. We have those same priorities at Federal Transit. And those are our priorities because we know when you invest in public transit systems, you're investing in each of those priorities. So what we've seen is transit systems have to be nimble, have to pivot. So we've seen our systems across the United States redesign their bus networks to address the gaps in service and to think differently about the provision of transit service. We've seen reinvestments and expansion of service actually in some communities, as we've heard on the, from my colleagues, thinking differently about the provision of service on the weekends and thinking about how we expand service during those hours where people are commuting in late night or early morning hours, particularly for the service industry. These are some of the lessons that we've learned during the pandemic. What we are seeing are successful measures is promotions around special events, for example. So transit agencies are thinking, well, how do we attract people back to our systems? And some systems are being very creative. So you may have heard in New Jersey, 80,000 people took NJ Transit to a Taylor Swift concert, right? And you may have heard in New York City actually just hit its 4 million rider mark per day. Just recently. And this is because the transit agencies are talking and thinking differently about fare promotion, different sorts of fare policies, and then again, thinking differently about how they're providing service, expanding their service, redesigning their networks.
Thank you. The pandemic, we all know, it changed a lot, and it changed it really fast. And so we have a very uncertain environment. We all know that. We deal with it every day. All of you deal with it every hour, I'm sure. So when do you think we're going to get to the new normal? And can you talk to us a little bit about how you're working with your public, your riders, in terms of helping to shape that new normal? Yeah. Michelle, you want to start?
I'll start. First of all, the phrase new normal is not my favorite. I don't, and because for the longest time it was back to pre-pandemic. I think what we need to accept is take all of the good learning out of the pandemic. We changed our schedule 7 times. That's unheard of, trying different things. So I don't have a crystal ball that'll tell you when we're going to get back a significant number of riders. I do think what's critical, we talk about fare promotions, et cetera. We need to understand and reconnect with the communities in which we operate. And by communities, I'm talking about riders, we're talking about residents, and we're also talking about businesses and institutions. We need to create the types of relationships that would lead to an understanding of what a critical role transportation and transit plays in each of their lives and how it will drive the success of the economy. So I really think new normal, not talking about that, but we really do need to establish a nimble approach to how we can identify methods for growth and pursue them vigorously, and if they don't work, drop them. Move on to the next thing.
Jeff, your thoughts?
So for BART, Caltrain, and Muni, all of our lost ridership is associated with the empty 30 Transamerica pyramids worth of office space in downtown San Francisco. Those are the riders we're missing. There is no scenario in which that downtown San Francisco office space remains vacant. The question is, what uses will fill that space and how quickly? We're already starting to see a significant change driven by a collapse in commercial rents. This is always the sign that we look for in a cyclical San Francisco economy that marks the beginning of the new boom cycle. We're starting to see that, and we're also starting to see another really important signal, which is bankruptcies. And this is very important and very positive because we need commercial office building and hotel bankruptcies in order to refinance the financial instruments that have minimum commercial rents built into those leases. All of that needs to be rebuilt. Property values and rents need to be adjusted, and that unlocks the amazing thing about this region, and that's unlike any other previous bust cycle, where new job creation is still at a high and unemployment is at a low, and new businesses are forming that need physical space to come together in because business is rooted in trust, and trust is a biological phenomenon that requires people be in the same room together and be able to go out to the amazing bars and restaurants and nightclubs that San Francisco offers so well. So that's the question for us, is how quickly is that space going to fill? What is it going to fill with? And in the meantime, how do we continue sustaining the services that we have without collapsing? Because there is no economic recovery in this region without transit.
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very well said.
So I think, you know, within Silicon Valley, and I think many of you from here, of course, is that, you know, the market, we are seeing more people come to work, back into work, into the Santa Clara County region than we have, I think, than into San Francisco. But we also are aware that we're not going to be maybe in the same realm. People are coming in 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week, and those types of patterns. Now, it's interesting with my staff because I keep saying, those buildings that look sort of vacant, they're never going back to orchards. They're not going to be orchards again. They're not going to take them down and say, we're going to go back to orchards. They are going to be something, as Jeff said. We don't know what they will be. And what we've really done is gone out and engaged the cities, because Santa Clara County, or Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority is also the congestion management agency, so we deal a lot with the land use and the transportation. You sort of automatically do that because you're part of the city and the county, but we do a lot of that work and engage the city. So we're trying to go out there right now and find out where the city's at. So we're developing a visionary network that's actually looking at what can we do for the riders that we have and so that more people could come on. We're also looking at markets like, how do we serve restaurant workers and how do we serve grocery workers? Instead of going, this is the kind of service we should provide, we want to go out and say, what is the kind of service you need? And then we need to provide that service. And it's going out and really sort of measuring that kind. And it may not be the typical fixed route bus. Microtransit's out there now where it's the ability to get to major core routes, and we're looking at that throughout our county. But it's really building that out. We're looking at new technologies that help us run faster. In a way, for good or bad about the pandemic, in a way it's given us room to step back and reimagine, and that's probably the, you know, for me, one of the funnest things to do in transportation is to actually have that opportunity in time to look at everything that's going on. How do we use particularly technology to transform what we're doing? And that engagement and actually trying to work with other industries, as you said, it's really engaging. Engaging is really important. We can't stay in our own area and start designing the way we normally do. I do think that rules, regulations, policies, those may have to change over time to allow that flexibility for us to be able to make quick changes. Everybody could do that in the pandemic. In a way that was wonderful, you know, but we couldn't, and take risks.
Right.
As public agencies, we don't tend to take risks as much as others do because of the bureaucracies and you know, you're stewards of public monies. But I think, you know, I think we need to be able, I think transportation industry is going to have to take risks, and we're going to need leaders who are willing to do that, and we need boards that understand that. We need elected officials, and we need programs that understand that that's what we need to do.
Well said. Veronica, you have some thoughts?
We can't and shouldn't discuss the new normal of transportation without addressing the abnormal in housing, in climate change, in traffic congestion. So we are seeing, with regards to climate, unprecedented events. Canada is burning. I live in DC. It's a code purple today. Many of you are familiar with those codes and those AQIs. And the indices that impact our day-to-day. Traffic congestion is, in many communities, at pre-pandemic levels again. And housing affordability is a big problem in many communities across the United States, and it's leading to unprecedented levels and rates of unsheltered individuals in our communities. So those are the abnormals that we should not be thinking of as the new normals. All of these are interrelated variables and factors. So when we think about the connection of transportation, our network, but more specifically our public transit systems, and how each of those other factors, housing, climate change, traffic congestion, are all interrelated, we have to start thinking very differently about this conversation. We can't just be talking about them independently. They are so codependent.
Very, very, very important point. Now I'm going to ask you all a question that I know comes up every day, and you've heard it over and over, but I came from another conference this morning, and it is a top priority for everyone related to thinking about transit, and that is safety and security. Mm-hmm. So talk with us a little bit about what you're all doing in that arena. And my key question with that is not just that you're trying to address it, but have you had any places where you've really been able to measure some success?
Do you want to?
Sure, I'll dive in. I mean, this is something that is top of mind for all of us. I mean, really, I think for most of us, the two top issues that we're contending with, number one is the fiscal cliff, and are we going to be able to be offering service next year? And two is we call it safety and security, but I think it's important to name what our riders are really concerned about, which is untreated mental health and addiction issues on the street, which inevitably find their way onto public transit. So if you look at our reported crime rate is at or near historic lows. It's less than a quarter of what it was a decade ago, even on a per capita or per mile basis. The problem is we have people with untreated mental health and addiction issues causing problems on transit and frightening our riders. And in terms of developing ridership, it's the perception factor is far more important than actual reported violent crime rates. So one of the things that I've been talking to the state about is there was a promise made here in California when we shut down one of the best developed mental health care systems in the world. And that promise was that the state would fund community treatment in all cities. It is foolish to try to delegate to municipalities, let alone transit agencies, the responsibility for dealing with a systemic issue like mental health and addiction in California. This is a topic where we absolutely need the state of California to step it up. We know from examples anywhere in Western Europe and through much of Latin America and East Asia what the solutions are to these problems. They are well studied. They are solvable, but they require acknowledging what the real problem is and funding known solutions. That said, we're also dealing with a lot of training across all of our public-facing folks. We're investing in ambassador programs, de-escalation training across all of our workforce, and working to try to cultivate a sense of civility on our vehicles rather than employing aggressive police techniques, because the latter doesn't actually solve the underlying problem, but supporting compassion and engaging with our riders about what the issues are and how to manage them is the best that we can do as transit operators.
And it's true. And I want to agree with Jeff on the homeless I mean, I think most all of us can agree with that is an issue. And it does, you know, we do talk about if we got the ridership up, there's a feeling of safety with more riders on the vehicles with us. But we've also noticed at Santa Clara County, we're dealing with the homelessness. You know, we can put the cameras on. I have a new chief system safety and security officer who's coming in, and we've done a lot of work right now on, it is on perception, but it's also the psychological safety of people right now, and them feeling comfortable that the services feels safe to them, not just with the homelessness, but that we have drivers that care and they feel like it's a quality service that's being out there for them. I also think that with the service that's going, with the people who are coming, the comments that we get oftentimes is about sort of the homelessness, but it's also about the presence of security officers. And we've had a lot of issues because we use the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. You know, I had a meeting with them the other day where they're going to have to cut. I'm not going to say cut. They don't have enough officers, so they're going to we're going to have to take a cut in some of our division patrol, even though we could pay for it. But because they need to place them in other areas, they need to spread out the county sheriffs. Law enforcement, we're really stuck, and it's because people don't want to go. We also need it's their presence that is really important, and it's response time. And the thing that we've seen an increase in is the report of operator assaults, and how they get reported to FTA or through other programs or through other areas is different than the way our operators perceive an assault. So that's one thing we're working on. We're working on with the state. Each agency has to go to the state separately to get legislation to prohibit someone from being on your bus who is threatening assaults, being very abusive or that. We have to individually, as an agency, because we're running that legislation now for us, we want to go in the bill with Santa Cruz County, and they didn't want to carry two. They want to carry one at a time because of the reason why. So there's just barriers in place to make our operators feel safe as well. And it does feel like, and I'm going to say this, whether it's true or, you know, whether it's my perception or not, there is a brazenness. And I was talking to a lot of transit police chiefs around the country, Houston, Atlanta, and that. There is somewhat of a brazenness right now for people to feel that they can say what they want to do or behave in a way that we would not have done before, you know, somewhat abusively to a frontline worker. And you've got to realize, like our bus operators, our light rail operators, but particularly our bus operators, they are out there driving, you know, a 40,000 ton, I don't exactly know I forgot how many tons it is, 40,000 pound vehicle along the streets, trying to keep their passengers safe, trying to be safe, trying to make sure their people are getting there. We're, you know, making sure they're not causing any issues with all the other activity around them. They are one of the loneliest people sitting out there. And so the more technology we can use to support their activities, to support their ability to understand their routes, to give them, there are lots of technologies now on training for vehicles that actually help provide accidents and prevent accidents. Those types of things helps them focus more and feel more relaxed as well. But really the assaults and the reporting on those assaults drive people away as well. If you hear that we can't keep our drivers safe, how are we going to keep our riders safe?
I can only amplify a couple of things that both Carolyn and Jeff pointed out. I will say one of the things that Caltrain did during the pandemic is we took a look inside to figure out, okay, if we want to have the safest environment out there, how do we value safety within the culture of our own organization? And it was a lot of self-reflecting, and we found some stuff that maybe wasn't the greatest. But we've spent the last year and a half now really emphasizing safety culture within our organization, and that has led to things like de-escalation training for conductors, identifying systems that could help us in terms of reporting. And I have to say, we're fortunate, thank you FTA, and thank you partners, we're going to be bringing in a whole new fleet of vehicles. We're going to have a riding environment that is brand new, state-of-the-art, and so we have the fortunate ability to change out what does look old and potentially, it's never not safe, but it's really, that new car smell goes a long way. Let me put it that way.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I have a question I think you're all going to be interested in, especially for the people in this group, and that is, I understand the Deputy Administrator really walks the talk, so to speak, and that you have given up your car entirely. And I think we're just curious, how has that really affected your view of transit and lifestyle? And I think I'm looking at this room and guessing that there is probably no one in here that doesn't have a car or have easy access to a car. So, oh, well, you live in San Francisco. So, but I think hearing your views of it would be very interesting.
So it's because of my role and because of my work for the past 16 years that I made that decision. So I have confidence in our public transit systems. I've also made a choice to live in a community that allows all these different options for me to get around. So I live in DC, where I can take the metro, and I do, where I can walk to work, where I can bike to work, and I can ride share, right, and car share. But my advocacy in this space for 16 years has been to ensure that our state legislatures and our municipal governments make these investments in these systems. I'm fortunate to be able to live in a community that affords me these options. I made that choice, but I recognize in this work that not everyone has that decision. So we need to ensure that we're making these investments so people can make a decision. I know that owning a vehicle is on average $12,000 a year. It is an expensive, depreciating asset. And not everyone has the luxury nor the privilege to invest in that depreciating asset. So in this work, I'm committed to making sure that I do live that walk and that talk. So a very specific example, can it be, it can be more productive when you're using transit. So I'm from New York. I used to run an advocacy organization, nonprofit. We had an office in Camden, New Jersey. It took 3.5 hours one way for me to get from home to that office, which I did quarterly. I had a car, but I opted to do that 3.5 hours instead of taking that 2-hour drive because I was more productive. Sitting for 2 hours in traffic was less productive and not worth my time than for me to ride transit 3.5 hours. So for those of us who are incredibly busy and think that doesn't fit into your very busy lifestyle, I would challenge you to say, how much work do you get when you're behind the wheel? And you are actually driving that vehicle and not being driven in that vehicle. So, again, I recognize that that is not an option for everyone, but it is important for us to think about providing those options on a larger scale.
And hopefully you're not texting or emailing while you're driving in that vehicle. Okay. I want to raise an issue about the future because in today's world, it can be very easy to be very gloomy, maybe a little doom and gloom. And here in the Bay Area, where we keep being told, we're at the bottom of the heap in terms of comeback and transit. At the same time, we have a lot of data and a lot of planning that says by 2050, we'll be a much bigger region, maybe as much as another 1.5 million households. Sometimes listening to the daily news here, that's a little hard to imagine, but I am very curious for all of you to share what your agencies are thinking about the future and how you continue to make transit part of that future, because when we think about the traffic out there, and I've tackled it twice today myself, when we think about the traffic, we think about the congestion, we think about all the interrelated issues that the Deputy Administrator brought up with housing and just so many things that come together. And then, of course, why we're here today, right? Sustainable and climate and things that are going to impact all of our lives. What are some of the thoughts your agencies have about how you see transit growing in the future, knowing that it's going to have to if we're going to accommodate growth?
Yeah. I'll jump in. I mean, I'm sure at times has been gloomy for all of us. I think one of the great outcomes of the pandemic is certainly in the Bay Area. I've seen the transit agencies coordinate and certainly at the GM level, really try and dig in to identify and find resolution to regional problems. And so I think one of the things that is really going to be a measure of this success in the future is how we continue to be knit together as Bay Area agencies in order to provide regional solutions. Having said that, I know at the Caltrain organization, while we are diversifying, we are transforming the railroad. We'll be operating those snazzy new trains in about a year and a half. We know that bringing this electrified service on can allow us to really provide much more service on the off times and really be able to provide the robust service that all sorts of communities and types of riders need. We really need to provide different products within the very kind of not very nimble mode that is commuter rail. Having said that, we are a commuter rail. We are trying to transition to more of a regional rail style, but we got to fill those buildings.
That's right.
And we'll be there to provide the service.
Everything that Michelle said. And in addition, in San Francisco, we're fortunate that we're both the Department of Transportation. So I manage the streets and I run Muni, which carries about half of the region's transit riders. And so during COVID, we were able to dramatically transform the system, and we're seeing sustained 15 to 25% improvement in transit speed and reliability on our main lines. We eliminated major delays in our subway by over 60%, and we're holding on to those improvements. And I think our partnership with the other regional operators is not only getting them to see what they could do, but also getting the other municipalities who they're dependent upon to step up and manage their streets better. Most importantly, one of the things that I'm most excited about is Caltrans is now coming to the table. Caltrans is realizing that the state transportation system, the state highways are not getting any wider. We're no longer demolishing low-income neighborhoods to add traffic lanes, and the state is growing. And so the only choice that Caltrans has is to manage the state highway system to prioritize the movement of people and goods rather than just the movement of vehicles. So they were enthusiastic about us striping carpool lanes on Lombard Street, which they control. And they're getting increasingly enthusiastic about creative ways of using existing travel lanes to prioritize the movement of people and are getting ready to step up their leadership. With Caltrans leadership and with all of the regional transit operators working together, and increasingly the region's cities working together, I think the future is actually amazingly positive for transit in the Bay Area if we can get through the next 3 years of recovery with state operating support.
Okay, and with Santa Clara County, we're currently about 25% of the Bay Area population is within Santa Clara County, and VTA not only runs the transit operations, but we also are a major implementer of highway projects. We run the express lanes in Santa Clara County. We also do a lot of work with the bicycle improvements and help build those. And in fact, it was interesting. 2 nights ago, we won the at the CTF, California Transportation Foundation Awards, like their Oscars for California transportation. We won the interchange project of the year. But what won that interchange project of the year was, yes, there were safety improvements that were done and a rebuild of it, but it was the bicycle improvement and the connection that we made of connecting these two communities. That it was amazing the number of people who talked about how often they didn't go that way. They had kids, they traveled differently. Our elected officials who grew up in the area were talking about the same thing, but it won because of the other improvements in being able to make those connections in other ways for bicycle improvements. And Santa Clara County is a fairly flat county outside of the hills that it lies in. So biking is a huge effort. And so we're building this big central bikeway expressway that will actually be able to connect to our major transit hubs. We have transit-oriented development, a huge portfolio within VTA itself that we're looking at building housing and affordable housing combined with mixed use. And so there's a whole series of things that we're doing to get ready, but it's the idea of bringing those activities together to support transit, not just within our county, but within the region. We have a huge hub called the Diridon Station in San Jose that will be if high-speed rail, when high-speed rail, or if and when high-speed rail get here. But even with Caltrain and the number of trains they'll be running and all the other services that come down, and VTA's building BART into San Jose and over to that station, and we'll have over 500 train trips going in and out of it a day. Because our light rail goes there as well. Most people don't know that, but that is a lot of travel that would be transferred. That whole area will transform. There are lots of things to be excited for transportation and for transit. And we have a workforce right now that wants to take transit. They don't want to own cars. They don't want to put the money into owning a car. Cars are much more expensive today than they were maybe when we bought them years ago. So I think, our focus right now is really building the synergies in all of our systems to make sure they support each other so that transit does well. Our quality of life, I am a true believer that transportation is absolutely plays a major role in the quality of life, and that we offer the services to continue to help improve and sustain a really good quality of life in Santa Clara County and the region. And I think it's important to understand how the systems integrate.
Great. So we have some great questions from the audience. I'm going to try to cover as much as possible from what I got. And then I want to reserve maybe a minute at the end for the Deputy Administrator to share kind of some big picture thoughts with us from the national perspective. So we have a couple questions that relate to technology. And I guess, again, being here in Silicon Valley today, it's always exciting to think that technology does help improve our lives, right? We all know that. We have certain aspects maybe we worry about, but I don't know, is AI going to take over running everything for us? Or talk a little bit about what you're all thinking about with technology related to how that helps the situation.
For us, I think, well, obviously, we're changing from diesel to electric, and so this is such a huge transformation. So that's the obvious thing. But I think, I just want to go back to, we run trains, but we're really transferring people from place to place. We happen to do it on a train. And so for us, I think we're looking into things, very modest investments in technology that can help us work with our customers better so we can provide for seamless schedule changes. So we can do things like provide information in ways that we cannot now to a larger base of customers because they need to know we're there if they're going to ride us. And so that's really what we're looking at.
In San Francisco, we're the city where both Uber and Lyft were born, where Cruise is headquartered, and Waymo is testing, and we actually probably have more autonomous vehicle testing in an urban site than the entire rest of the world combined. And yet, the only problems that we need technology to help us solve are problems, as Michelle said, around customer information and economic efficiency. Anytime somebody comes to me with a new technology around transportation, I ask 4 questions. 1, to what degree is this technology going to help me move more people in my fixed street rights of way? Number 2, to what degree is this technology going to help improve accessibility to services, particularly for people with the fewest choices, and especially people with disabilities, people with low incomes, people living in underserved communities? Number 3, to what degree is this technology going to advance safety in the roadway, particularly for vulnerable road users not actually using that particular technology? And number 4, how does this technology help us decarbonize the transportation sector, which is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in California? And so for those of you who are in the technology world, if you want to come pitch me on something, make sure you have a positive answer to all 4 of those questions. And most importantly, make sure you come prepared to share your actual performance data, not just what your marketing department wants to show us. Not that I have any bitterness around certain companies.
So it's been interesting. I have a brand, a lot of it is under this, the zero emission bus mandate that we have that's coming up is something that is you know, the technology of the buses is getting there. It's not quite at the battery level that we'd like, you know, to, for the long routes, yeah. We're also looking at hydrogen, and so there's a balance of that. The bigger issue is the infrastructure, the storage that you need. We're looking at a lot of technology and how do you manage 500, 600 bus fleet over 3 yards, and how do you are able to charge them, and when is the right time to charge them to avoid some of the peak hours and keep your operating costs down. That's technology that we really are trying to look at. We're looking at technology within the vehicle area, particularly in rail, and we were up recently at where they're getting their vehicles for Caltrain, and I was up there recently to look at light rail. Nobody in the country has light rail vehicles. They're built by this manufacturer who has the largest light rail fleets out there in Europe right now. But we're looking at taking light rail, which you've always seen the catenary, and being able to run it partly off rail on part of our system, then running it back on rail. And I know there's a little bit of that at Muni now, but it allows us for us to take it off the downtown. It allows us not to have to build the infrastructure that we need to do, which is very costly. We don't have enough people in the sector right now, as Michelle's starting to learn, on learning overhead catenary. How to take care of line workers, substations, those types of things. So any technologies or AI tools that can help us train better and be able to have the curriculum is very important to us. Workforce development, I would say, are the 4 things that, I mean, my agency right now, we're doing a huge organizational culture and climate transformation. And the 4 areas that we're looking at is communications. How do you communicate to people nowadays? Both internally, across, up and down, externally. How do we communicate? Well, how do we do our workforce development and leadership development? Workforce development is really critical there. And third is safety. That is absolutely critical, particularly psychological safety as well. And then the last is employee resources. I hate to say this, but being the agency that's sitting in Silicon Valley as a transit agency, we are not very technology savvy. And it drives me crazy because I'm from the engineering, I love industrial engineering, operations research type work. And I come in and go, where's the analytics? We have like no analytics. Everything is still a lot of paper. And we are moving to all those resources. So there's this whole area of being able to operate more efficiently, inventory supply tracking systems, understand 3D printing for obsolete parts. Those are the types of things that we are starting to look at. Cool. So I know I'm talking. You can tell I'm the engineer in me is coming out, but
businesses out here.
But there is all these abilities to use technology. I probably don't ask as many questions as Jeff. I get sort of wild at first, and then I have to figure out if there's a use for it. But I do. I would, there is definitely a focus in our agency that we have got to start to look at technology from all different ways. But I will say one of the reasons why we don't sometimes is it is really hard to do it in a sense of when you don't know what to do, can you sole source it? Our procurement processes are not nimble enough, and nor is our structures nimble enough, as I said, to take those risks. And I think it is up to leadership to be willing to take those risks, including your board and ourselves, to be able to do that and have a management team that supports that. And I think now, with all of us going through this pandemic, we've all had to take the risks. Now's the time, and come and talk to us about what you can do to help us be more efficient, provide a safer system, cleaner system, faster system.
Opportunities unlimited. Okay, let me ask you, and because again, we had the Energy Secretary here today, and I heard several other things earlier in the conference today about power. And obviously, this comes up all the time. If we're all driving electric vehicles and you're all transitioning to electricity more and more and more, what are some of your thoughts or concerns or worries or plans related to the power grid itself? Is that an issue that is top of mind?
I would say I'm very nervous about our utility companies can keep up to speed. I mean, we're mostly in this area, it's PG&E. When I was in Utah, it was Rocky Mountain Power. They were a lot more nimble. They were actually giving grants to us to be able to, grants to build overhead charging stations so that you could then use the charging stations, and you would be using their power and you'd be paying them. But there was a lot more synergies and being able to work together. I think here I'm very nervous of whether our power companies are ready to help put that infrastructure in place. California is very lucky. We have a good hydrogen network.
Michelle looks scared
sorry,
enough.
I'm
Just,
getting ready to climb on you.
No, it's a lot of work.
I just feel like there's such an emphasis on the vehicle, and the wayside and energy
Yeah.
resiliency is not a huge focus, or at least not in the
Scary.
areas that I travel. Sorry, get off that. And so I'm just in violent agreement with you. I don't think the solution is just with the power companies, though.
No.
I think it's again a combination of policy and also like innovation. Like one of the things that I think is really important is to continue to develop battery technology. Right now it's big, heavy batteries, can't go very far, and that'll help us save on infrastructure in non-dense places. But we've got to continue to push that. But yeah, I'm concerned.
Yeah, and we're lucky here in California. We have a good hydrogen network and ability to maybe build it out. I actually looked when we were in Utah because there was a push to do some hydrogen. Their hydrogen network, overall in the state, we had like 40 public fueling stations. There were only 2 others in the entire rest of the country. And I don't even know, they weren't anywhere that was, I don't know what they were for. South Carolina and somewhere else, I forget who had it. But these other states have to build a network or build a distribution center that they don't have. I think we need to take advantage of that as well and the ability. But I think the technology in the industry for us is going to be absolutely critical, and how can we maintain it and not have it go so obsolete on us, because as transit agencies, we don't have the money to continuously turn it over every 2 or 3 years.
Converting Muni's last remaining biodiesel hybrid vehicles to electric or hydrogen is by far the least cost-effective thing that we could possibly do to advance climate. It would arguably worsen our greenhouse gas emissions, in part because it triggers $1 billion of rebuilding all of our bus facilities, many of which are over 100 years old, are completely out of code compliance, and need a complete reconstruction in order to adapt them to electric vehicles. I have many thoughts on this topic, but that's all I
given
will
our
say for
time,
now.
Jeff, we'll.
I think one of the things that is the general managers in the Bay Area is there are a lot of unfunded mandates that the transit agencies deal with. And sometimes we're nervous that it's at the expense of service that we could provide, more service and better service out there. And so it makes me nervous thinking about having the money that we're going to spend on electric vehicles when I really want to put more service out on the street in the midday and the weekends and the night, and you have to trade that off. And I don't know if there's enough analysis to say the climate change benefits that you get for people not having to drive and having that option to take transit, where you start really picking up more versus the buses. I don't know that, and I don't think there's a lot of policy, as she said, that's been made. And then there's policy that we need made to look at those.
You can Google SFMTA Climate Action Plan and look at the cost-benefit charts of the various things that we might be able to do.
Great.
So there's analysis.
My apologies to those of you who shared a question that we're probably not going to get to, but I do want to let our Deputy Administrator from FTA share some of her thoughts we're in historic times with the Biden administration. We're very grateful for that, and would love to hear some of your thoughts about what that may mean.
So the transit sector is experiencing an existential moment. And we've discussed some very real challenges that we're encountering right now in this industry. But it isn't all gloom and doom. So to answer this panel question, is mass transit at the last stop? No. We are actually, we have some wonderful positive stories to share. So let's start with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which gave the Department of Transportation $108 billion. That is an unprecedented historic amount of funding for transportation. What that means is it's allowed the Federal Transit Administration in fiscal year 22, our last fiscal year, to support 3,630 transit projects in your communities. That means we got $40 billion in formula funds and competitive grant funds to support our communities, to mitigate climate change, to support our workforce, to connect each other to one another, and to all the essential services that we know. We understand in this region that by 2050, all of the regional highways are going to be at capacity. In New York, in the New York metro area where I'm from, there was a study done many years ago that estimated the annual economic loss of traffic congestion was $20 billion. $20 billion. I can't imagine that that number is any different in this area. And that is also a region where traffic congestion is at capacity and the infrastructure is constrained. So when you think about transit investment, you're thinking about reducing that impact. Transit investment is also a Vision Zero strategy. So we talked about safety, and we talked about safety from the lens of, a very important lens of operator and rider safety. But when you invest in public transit systems, you're ensuring that our communities are a lot safer. So communities that invest in public transit have reduced traffic fatalities by 40% when they've coupled that investment with bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Many of you know that there's 43,000 traffic fatalities every single year. So when you're investing in transit, you're saving lives. We've talked about climate mitigation. So if one person converts his or her 20-mile commute from a vehicle to public transportation, they are saving 20 pounds a day of CO2 emissions. Now, many of you in this room may say, well, many of us are using greener cars, and that is true, but that infrastructure is still required to provide a place for your green car. And the more asphalt we have in our communities, the greater increase we have in greenhouse gas emissions. So you've heard this statistic. Transportation sector comprises 26% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. In California, that's 40%. I also want to talk about the opportunity to, on a positive outlook, the investment that we've made in green technology. So there's greener buses in our communities, and we've heard our partners talk about that. FTA is a valuable supporter and partner in these investments, and that is reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to end on this note. We are seeing states make the commitment to invest in their transit systems, and that's important. The federal government is a partner. We're not going to solely fund your transit systems. We need you as partners. And the you is the public sector and the private sector. It is important that we work together, and we are seeing some positive stories around the country of communities that are opting for ballot referendums to raise more revenue for their transit systems. And in fact, some of the cities that are experiencing the greatest fiscal cliffs and cities within states are showing some tremendous leadership. In New York, where I'm from, the governor actually is supporting transit with $1.1 billion in increased revenue. That's significant. And that should be a model for other states around this country. So I want to make that plea and that pitch that we are proud to be a partner, but we are a partner. We need your support and your contributions into this overall goal. And we know there are many, many shared goals here.
Well, we certainly hope that the governor and the legislature were listening, Veronica. I don't know about all of you, but this incredible panel has certainly made me feel that transit is not at the last stop. I remain optimistic, and I think they all deserve a great hand for being here today.